on. Let me reiterate, the government is not here to punish anyone, but we are trying to strike the best balance between bringing in our returning nationals, and I commend Minister Young for the excellent job that he has been doing and protecting our 1.4 million citizens, and also for protecting our healthcare system from being overburdened. There's one issue I would like to raise and address pertaining to the new regulations, where bars, as of today, I believe, I think the old regulations expired yesterday. The new regulations will be in effect until September 30th. And this is a piece of advice, and we seek the cooperation of bars and restaurants. The closing time is 10 p.m. What we are suggesting is that each establishment, whether you're a bar, a full-service bar, whether you are both a bar and a restaurant, whether you're a casual dining restaurant doing both bar and food, is that each one determine their lead time for the preparation of drinks and meals, so that you could have a last order, a last call system where you say, okay, we will take our last order for food by 9 o'clock or by 9:30, depending on how long you think it takes to prepare food. Same thing for bars. Take your last order for drinks at whatever time is relevant to your establishment. The reason for doing this, in talking with the Minister of National Security, who will be in contact with the Commissioner of Police, is that we would like these eating establishments and bars to be empty of patrons by 10 p.m. That is the objective, so that you could close at 10 p.m. and be free of patrons. Patrons. What we are not suggesting is that you take your last order for food at 5 to 10, the food comes at 10:30, and then you are still eating and dining at 11:30. So we are asking for the cooperation of each establishment based on your particular logistics of when you think you can safely take your last order, have your last set of patrons accommodated, and be closed by 10 p.m. And then hopefully what you would see in these establishments after 10 p.m. is just your cleanup staff, your kitchen staff doing washing up and so on. But we would like patrons to be out by 10 p.m. so that we could prevent the congregation, because this virus is not slowing down. There are still 200,000 cases on average per day being discovered around the world. So those are my comments this morning, Minister Cox. I do hope that we don't want to overburden the police by going into each bar, each restaurant. Let's all accept our share of the responsibility. It's a shared responsibility, and just do what is right. So, Minister Cox, that is my global and regional update, and I thank you for the opportunity this morning.
Thank you very much, Minister. The Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Paraswaram, will provide us with a clinical update. Dr. Paraswaram.
Okay, good morning, Honorable Ministers, Professor Carrington, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. So the clinical status update for Monday, 20th July 2020. The total number of samples submitted to both the University and the Caribbean Public Health Agency now stand at 6,074. Total number of unique patient tests, 4,557. Number of repeated samples in the public sector, 1,517. Total number of community tests submitted to the University of the West Indies Lab, public sector, 2,184, At the private sector, we now have standing as of Friday, the 17th of July, 1,534 samples submitted, all of which were negative. The total number of samples, therefore, for the country, private and public, now stand at 7,608. Of these, a total positive count remains at 137, with the last positive test being gotten on Saturday last. Total number of discharges remain at 124, total number of deaths remain at 8, and the total number of hospitalized patients remain at 5. With regards to the parallel system in quarantine, we now have 164 persons. 48 of those are at the UE DB Penal campus. At the Chancellor Hotel, we have 12 individuals. At the Cascadia Hotel, there are 44. At the Tacarigua facility, we have 21 persons, and at the Home of Football, we have 39 individuals. At the Napa right now, we have no healthcare workers being housed. Minister Cox, that's my update for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parasram. Professor Christine Carrington, Professor of Molecular Genetics and Virology, and Head of the Department of Preclinical Sciences, Faculty of Medical Sciences at the University of the West Indies, will speak on immunity to COVID-19. Professor Carrington.
Thank you, Ministers and Chief Medical Officer Dr. Parasram, and good morning to members of the media and to the viewing and listening public. There's been a lot of discussion recently in the media about the immune response to COVID-19, the COVID-19 virus, which is SARS-CoV-2, and in particular about people who recover from the SARS-CoV-2 infection and the question of whether they're protected against reinfection, and if so, how long does that protection last? Now, despite all the recent headlines, the short answer to that is that no one knows. Scientists are still trying to determine exactly how COVID-19 immunity works. There are clues, but the picture is far from complete. Now, before I go into what is currently known, I first want to remind you that our immune systems use several tools to fight viral infections, and each type of virus requires a slightly different set of tools. Now, these tools include special proteins called antibodies, which recognize and bind to viral proteins. Some antibodies work by binding to the virus particles in such a way that they prevent the virus from infecting and replicating in their target cells. And these antibodies are called neutralizing antibodies. Now, the immune system toolkit also includes special immune cells called T cells that recognize and kill cells that have been infected so that they can't produce any more virus. Now, the first time the immune system encounters a particular virus, it can take a few days for it to size up this invader and then to make and use the right set of tools to clear the infection. And after an infection with a given virus, the immune system remembers what it learned about how to protect the body against that specific virus. So if it encounters that same virus again, it can mount a defense much more quickly and prevent the infection from taking hold, or at least prevent it from causing illness or from spreading to other people. This is what we mean when we say someone has developed immunity to a particular virus. Now, for some viruses, immunity can last a lifetime, while for others, it may only last a few months or years, after which time reinfection is possible. Often with the second infection being less severe than the first, although this is not always the case. There are also some viruses that the immune system never manages to clear completely. Now, the first clue to where SARS-CoV-2 immunity might fall on that spectrum came from other coronaviruses known to infect humans. Infection with these other coronaviruses results in the production of protective antibodies, we know that, and the level of protection depends on the type of virus and also the severity of infection. So you produce these antibodies, but with these other coronaviruses, those antibodies typically decline. So they go down to undetectable levels within about 3 months to 3 years. And that depends on the type of coronavirus and the severity of the infection the person had. Occasionally, it lasts for longer. Now, in general, the more severe the infection, the stronger and longer lasting the immune response. This is what we know about the other coronaviruses that are out there. Other human coronaviruses that cause like common cold and stuff. Now, for some of these other coronaviruses, studies showed that initially, when antibody levels are high, there is protection against reinfection. But as the antibody levels fall, this so-called sterilizing immunity is lost and reinfection can occur. Based on these data, scientists hypothesized that antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 may provide protection for at least some period of time. We now have strong evidence from multiple studies that most people develop antibodies against SARS-CoV-2, and they do that by about 1 or 2 weeks after infection, and that the antibodies produced include strong neutralizing antibodies that remain at high levels for a few weeks after infection and then they typically begin to decline. So similar to the other known human coronaviruses. A recent study out of the UK that has been widely reported in the media found that on average, neutralizing antibodies were first detected about 2 weeks after the onset of COVID-19 symptoms. They rose to a peak level by about day 23, and then there was a rapid decline. As in previous studies, they also found that people with less severe disease had lower peak neutralizing antibody levels than those with more severe disease. Also, they found that in the people with the lower antibody levels, the neutralizing antibodies dropped to undetectable levels in just under 2 months, so they didn't last very long. People who started off with higher neutralizing antibody levels also showed a significant decline over time, but their antibodies remained detectable at the end of the 3-month study period. So further follow-up is needed to determine if their antibodies will also eventually become undetectable. Now, many news outlets reported this study. They reported that this study confirmed that SARS-CoV-2 immunity is short-lived and that people can be reinfected within months of recovery. In fact, what the study showed, and which is also important to note that this study hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, what the study showed is that in some people, neutralizing antibodies are short-lived. Now, in light of this, and based on what we know about the other coronaviruses, the authors of that study, of the paper describing that study, they suggested, but they certainly did not confirm, that reinfection might be possible in these people. However, the authors also noted that, and as I also indicated earlier, the immune system is comprised of much more than just neutralizing antibodies. So measuring neutralizing antibodies can give you clues as to what might happen, but it cannot tell the whole story. For example, we don't know whether the immune T cells play an important role in providing protection against reinfection or reducing symptoms. And even if the neutralizing antibodies that they measured are a critical component, we don't know what levels are required to confer protection. Animal studies suggest that even though low levels of SARS-CoV-2 neutralizing antibodies might not protect against reinfection, they may be sufficient to prevent disease symptoms. Also, research on other coronaviruses where reinfection was shown to be possible, they noted that reinfected individuals did not experience any symptoms. So in summary, any conclusions about reinfection with SARS-CoV-2 based on antibody studies is premature. And we can, however, we can't make any firm conclusions and say, yes, people can be reinfected, or no, they can't be reinfected. But we can ask the question of whether there have been any confirmed cases of reinfection, and so far the answer is no. Now, there have been sporadic reports around the world of people who tested negative. They had COVID-19, they were in recovery, they tested negative by PCR twice, and were therefore considered cured. And then as many as 1-2 months later, they tested positive again. And this led to the suggestion that people were being reinfected. However, the PCR test, which detects the presence of genetic material from the virus, cannot tell whether the viral genetic material that it's detecting is due to the presence of infectious virus particles or if it is just non-infectious viral debris. The only way to confirm this is by taking a sample from the patient and trying to grow it and trying to actually grow the virus to see if the infectious virus is still there. And so far, in cases where this has been done, the results indicate that there is no infectious virus, and what is being detected, months after somebody has recovered and looks like a reinfection, what is actually being detected is this viral debris. This also appears to be the case in people who consistently test positive weeks after their symptoms have disappeared. However, since the routinely used tests cannot confirm one way or the other what it is, if it's infectious or non-infectious, the protocol being used is to keep testing until there are 2 negatives. Finally, there are some people who oscillate back and forth between negative and positive PCR results. Now, all tests have a limit of detection, below which they won't detect their target even if it is present, resulting in a false negative result. Now, PCR tests are extremely sensitive, But if the level of virus in a patient sample is below the test threshold of detection, it will return a false negative result. Now, false negatives are most likely early on in an infection when the virus is only just beginning to replicate, so the levels are very low, and again, late in an infection after the immune system has cleared the majority of the virus. During these times, very slight variations in virus levels or in test conditions can mean that on one day you don't detect the virus and the next day when you retest, you detect it. Again, this is why they wait until there are 2 consecutive negative tests before someone is discharged. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Members of the media, the floor is now open. Remember to identify yourself and the media house you represent before posing your question. We want to give as many of you an opportunity to pose questions to us, but that means in our limited time, we will have to give each media house a chance to get a maximum of 2 questions in. Once we have completed the poll and time allows, I will come back to you. So let us keep this in mind as we begin taking your questions. Newsday.
Hi, good morning all. Shane Superville from the Newsday newspaper here. I have 2 really quick questions. Both can be answered either by the Minister or by the CMO. The first one has to do with public health guidelines as it relates to the campaign trail. I know the Minister would have spoken briefly about it on Friday, but up to yesterday there was political motorcade in Barataria and a lot of times here. I have 2 really quick questions. Both can be answered either by the Minister or by the CMO. The first one.
Okay, we are not hearing Shane.
We got the first one.
We got the first question. We got your first question, and could you now repeat your second question, please? We had some audio problems.
All right, no problem. The second question has to do with return to school for the SEA students.
Okay, we are not hearing Shane.
We got the first one.
We got the first question.
On the preparedness
we got your first question, and could you now repeat your second question, please? We had some audio problems.
Thermal guns available. No problem. The second question has to do with.
Okay. You want me to go? Or?
Yes, but I was just checking. I wonder if Shane, is your television on? We're getting a serious feedback. If it is on, you may need to take it off. Minister, you heard the 2 questions?
Yes, I did hear the 2 questions. So I will take the first one, and CMO will take the one on schools. So, yeah, thanks, Shane. So we have said constantly here that all political parties, all candidates, all campaign managers should manage the groups of people working with candidates, manage them as far as possible in groups of 25s, make sure they have masks, and even within the groups of 25, make sure there is some distancing between them. I would not comment on the actions of the police commissioner in Diego Martin. That is a police matter. But I think the basic instruction from a health perspective is that we need to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want community spread. We want the elections to go on as safely as possible, and it's incumbent upon everyone, myself included. I could tell you as a candidate doing walks, because I am so keenly aware of it, sometimes it is difficult to manage, and I have to be constantly reminding people, keep your masks on, stay in groups of 25, have a marshal. So if you have 50 people, have one person in charge of one group, another person in charge of another group. Provide masks for your followers, and let's have a safe and uneventful campaign as far as humanly possible. The CMO will now deal with the issue of schools.
So with regards to schools, I didn't catch the final part of your question, but as it relates to schools, as I said before, the Ministry of Health has put out a guideline, has sent a guideline to the Ministry of Education. They would now analyze that guideline and make it their own, and subsequently send out information to the principals, the school supervisors, the PTA, etc., to guide them as to how school is going to take place when they open in September, and even as they open now for SCA. So that decision as I said, our guidelines are complete, but the final decisions will be made by the Ministry of Education.
Okay, thank you. We go to Guardian Media Limited.
To guide them as to how.
Guardian Media.
And even as they open. So that's the decision.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Our guidelines are complete,
Okay,
but
great.
the final
So,
decisions will be made
Minister,
by
I
the
just
Ministry of
wanna
Education.
piggyback off of your
Okay,
response
thank you.
to Shane
Go
and my
to,
colleague there just
Guardian
now
Media Limited.
about the campaign trail and about having 50 persons. If you have more than the 25, at least separate them into groups and have the marshals and stuff, ensuring that
Yes, we are hearing you.
is adhered to. But no, I find that very interesting because it is clearly stated in the current iteration of the public health regulations that no more than 25 people should be found. If you have more than in the 25, at least separate them into groups period. I remember destroying that the Minister
Yes, we are hearing.
Security making that distinction. But no, I find that very interesting. The group that you are with is clearly at the time it was the current iteration now less than 5. The entire amount of persons at one given place.
We are having some serious audio problems. I don't know what is
Well,
causing it.
I got the gist of his
did
question.
You get the
Yeah,
gist of his
yeah.
question?
But he's still speaking.
Okay.
Okay, Richard,
If you're hearing us, we're not hearing you at this time. And we
Okay,
got the
so-
gist of your first question. And the minister will attempt to answer that,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back to you. But
Yeah.
we are having some audio problems.
So, Richard, we did get the gist of your first question about 25s. The same principle applies as to whether you're in a beach, in a river. We can't limit, and we did not limit Maracas Bay, let's say, or Vesini Beach, or Crown Point, to 25 persons on the beach. The general advice is, if you are in a space, limit your grouping to no more than 25. Same thing for a bar, same thing for a restaurant. So, same thing on the campaign trail. It's a general advice that groups should not be more than 25 and they are to be managed. Whether you're in a beach, a river, a restaurant, a church. The churches now, places of worship, have more than 25, but they are spaced out. So again, a lot of common sense has to be applied, and the regulations are there to guide us and to help us. So I hope that answers what I thought was the first part of your question.
Okay, I think we will have to try to take some persons online. I don't know if Richard is on.
Yeah, I'm on the phone.
Okay.
Oh,
good.
lovely.
Go ahead.
Great.
Okay, Minister, right. So I just got the gist of your response there
Great.
to it, right? So now I'm going to, my follow-up question to that is, right, one, would that same kind of leniency be allowed to citizens who want to have any kind of gatherings of that sort? So could they adhere to the same policies or the same guidelines, I should say, that are being afforded to candidates who are campaigning? And the other part of that is now, I know you spoke about common sense, and we have to use common sense in this pandemic, and I agree where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, the police are the ones who are tasked with upholding and enforcing these regulations. So we can't now have one guideline being given and the regulation saying something else, because then we run into the problem of how does the police enforce this? And I would just like to throw us back to about 2 months or 3 months ago at the height of the COVID regulation and the COVID period, when yourself as well as Minister Young was saying, do not leave your house unless you have to, and only ensure that it's essential services and do not go for a jog. But then the police were saying, that is not in the regulation. We cannot stop you from doing that if that is the situation. So you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, so let me just go back, Richard. The Chief Medical Officer, because you were talking about private functions, the Chief Medical Officer explained at these press conferences several times about how the regulations apply to private functions, whether it's a wedding, a birthday party, a christening, and I will ask him to repeat himself on that. So, Chief Medical Officer.
Okay, in terms of your private, I think the distinction is between a public space and a private space. So, any space that is not deemed to be public, of course, the 25 doesn't hold for that particular space. So, we're speaking about places, for instance, a hall that is a private space that you only have visitation by invitation. Those people inside, we are asking that they use the guidelines that are for restaurants and bars, as well as churches, etc., to let people know how to be seated in those places, how many people should be fitting in based on the square footage, etc. But the regulation of 25 applies to a public space, and I think Minister was clear when he described how it can be used in beaches as well as other areas.
Okay, thank you. I think we want to go back to Newsday. Newsday.
Hi, good day. You all hearing me, right?
Yes, we're hearing
Lovely,
you.
yes, perfectly.
Yeah, Shane Superville here from the newspaper again. I just wanted to clarify the second question I had, and that would have been in relation to the reopening of schools for the SEA students. Okay. I just wanted to know some more details in terms of the kind of precautions would have been available in terms of monitoring the students, particularly with respect to thermal guns, and how much thermal guns would have been available to these schools.
Yeah, so that final question with regards to thermal guns, we have a daily monitoring that's supposed to take place in terms of temperature, in terms of signs and symptoms, for instance, fevers, etc., runny nose, that sort of thing. But that is to be done by the schools under the supervision of the principals. But again, I haven't seen the final document from the Ministry of Education after receiving our document on Thursday last week to comment on the specifics of it.
So in other words, Shane, the discussions are ongoing between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. Okay?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you were able to get 98.1 on the phone or TV6. Both hands are up. Okay, TV6 seems like they are ready.
Renessa.
TV6, they would be calling you. If you're hearing me, check your phone.
While we wait for TV6, so we don't have blank time, so we don't have dead time, Professor Carrington, if I may ask, our policy of using 2 negative tests 24 hours apart, which we have been using since the start of our response, that has been questioned in some quarters. Is that still relevant given the new information that you presented this morning?
Thank you, Minister. So what I indicated is that for people who have sort of gone no longer showing symptoms, and it's some time after, you want to find out, you want to be able to be sure that they are no longer infectious by testing them. Okay, so what I indicated is that the PCR test can detect the presence of the viral genetic material, but it doesn't allow you to say whether that material is infectious virus or not. So that's why we do 2 consecutive tests, because we figure if we get it, and also because of the low levels of virus, you do 2 consecutive tests to say, well, if it's low, it means that at least the virus isn't increasing. Now, given what we've learned is that a lot of the time when you're doing these tests after that peak of infection, when somebody's symptomatic, you tend to get what you're detecting is not infectious material. So there have been recommendations, and some countries have used the argument that they have decided that they will just look at, somebody hasn't shown symptoms for 10 days, and we'll assume that they are negative. Now, I think in a setting where you have a lot of virus in circulation, so for example in the US, if you get that calculation wrong and you send somebody out into the public who is still infectious, it won't make much of a difference if it's just a few people, because However, I think in our setting where we have no cases, we don't have the community spread, getting that wrong has a bigger impact, because you're introducing a new, you have no infection, and that one person could lead to outbreak and reinfection, and community spread, basically. So I think in our setting that the 2 tests is still very valid, and in a setting where you have community spread, you might want to change that. I think it's safer this way.
And just for the lay person like myself, somebody who was tested positive, had all these signs and symptoms, and then later on test positive, is it most likely that is viral debris which non-infective?
All right, so if you have somebody who tests positive, they're sick, they have symptoms, and then they start to recover, and they haven't shown any symptoms, and so you test them now to see if there's any virus left. What we're finding is that a lot of the time what you're detecting at that stage after they've recovered, so there's somebody who you knew was positive, you've seen them through or they've gone through their 2 weeks or whatever, you've seen them through their quarantine or through their disease, and now you're looking to see, is there any virus left? In those cases, at the end, what it looks like what they're finding is non-infectious particles. So these people would be unlikely to transmit to other people. Okay. But unlikely doesn't mean absolutely certain that they're not going to transmit to other people. So I think, as I said, in our setting, doing the 2 tests would still be a reasonable approach to take.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have 98.1 via phone.
Yes, good morning to the panel. Stephen Cummings here, 91 FM. And I have 2 questions quickly, one for Professor Carrington and the other, either the CMO or Minister Alleyne can take that one. Firstly, Professor Carrington, could the result of a reinfection of the disease be more severe and possibly lead to an almost sure death situation with patients? And Minister Alleyne or the CMO can take this one. Now, the WHO is running, I understand, an initiative to further discourage persons from smoking or the use of tobacco, which it says can help reduce the risk of COVID-19. Now, Dr. Tedros has also said that the pandemic has also provided an opportunity to emphasize that tobacco and e-cigarettes use pose an even higher risk to people. We are concentrating and we are focusing on COVID-19 and all the other, mitigation measures. I'm wondering if more emphasis should be placed on, responding to that question as it relates to the use of tobacco.
Okay, so I will take part of the second question first, then the CMO will take the other part. We have been saying on these press conferences from day one, the most high-risk persons are those with pre-existing conditions, especially diabetes, hypertension, respiratory disease. Smoking is highly associated with respiratory disease, and we said many times, not only that people should stop smoking, not only for COVID, but should stop smoking, period. Because once you have a respiratory system that is not functioning at 100%, you make yourself available for any virus that comes in there, and I will just let the CMO take off on that now. But at the end of the day, it's not only about smoking, it's about persons who are at high risk, who are smokers, who are asthmatics, who are diabetics, hypertension, obese, and the elderly.
Okay, so similar to what Minister said, just to add, anyone that has a compromised respiratory system, including tobacco smoking, that sort of thing, will be at a greater risk of respiratory compromise if and when they get infected with COVID or any other viral illness. So on that basis, and with smoking, we have an added side effect, if you want to call it, that people have an increased risk of blood clotting events, thromboembolic phenomenon. So you will have atherosclerotic disease in people that smoke as well to a greater level. And as we have seen in the new evidence, this sort of phenomenon is occurring across the world. So other organs are being affected, and smoking will only add to that effect. So smoking, from the start, smoking was something that we were advocating against from the Ministry of Health and from WHO, and we continue to do so.
And Mr. Cummings, I really want to thank you for raising that issue. That issue of smoking, which we tie to NCDs, is one of the major reasons why globally you have 600,000 deaths. Many of those deaths are in persons who have compromised respiratory systems or who are diabetic, hypertensive, the elderly. So I really want to thank you for raising that issue. Professor Cummins.
Professor Carrington.
Carrington.
Thank you. Okay, so the question was, could infection lead to more severe disease and death? And the answer to that is we do not know. Now, if I had to put money on it, I would say that it would be, you would get less severe disease. And the reason I would say that is because for other coronaviruses, as we know, there's 6 other human coronaviruses that we know of, and there are several of them that are associated with the common cold. And there's evidence for those that you can get reinfected, but when reinfection does occur, the reinfection is not associated with any symptoms, so you actually get less severe disease. And the reason why that might be happening is that even if the immune system is not, the immune response and the antibodies that a person has is not enough to prevent the body being infected by the virus, it might be enough to dampen down the rate at which the virus can replicate and therefore reduce symptoms. And also, as I said, our immune systems have memory. They can remember a virus that, your immune system can remember a virus that it's seen before. So even if that virus gets in and starts to replicate, the immune system will be able to respond much more quickly than in a primary infection. So chances are it would be less severe than the previous one. But of course, I repeat, we do not know. There are no confirmed cases of reinfection to study. There are some viruses that when you get infected a second time, you're at greater risk of severe disease, but I would be surprised if this was the case with the coronaviruses.
Okay, thank you. We go to TV6.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Renessa, Cutting TV6 News.
Morning, Renessa.
Morning. Could the ministry indicate how many persons in quarantine have been given that opportunity to register as special voters, and how many of them have actually taken the opportunity and registered? And given that the quarantine period is... Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. We're hearing you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, we're hearing you clearly.
Yeah. Given that the quarantine period is roughly about 14 days, and I understand that they would have to be in quarantine at the time of the election to be considered. Under that consideration, has the ministry reached out to persons who are scheduled to be repatriated within that time frame?
Okay, so basically what has happened so far is that there's apparently a deadline for persons to register as a special voter. So we have gotten the forms from the Elections and Boundaries Commission, submitted it to the persons in quarantine now, because those are the only individuals who will actually be able to make the deadline. However, those individuals who are in quarantine at this time, once they don't become positive, will be out of their quarantine prior to the elections, the special election, which I believe is in the first week of August. So we have distributed the forms just out of caution to give them the opportunity to register in the event that they may become positive and they have to stay longer. And I am supposed to receive feedback from the different sites today. We had sent it to all the sites to determine how many people actually filled them out. So that feedback was supposed to come in today. I didn't receive it as yet. In terms of the persons coming in, no, because there's an EBC deadline that says, I think Friday last was the deadline for special voting, and EBC can confirm. It does not, persons beyond that date wouldn't be eligible to be considered.
Okay, Express.
Good morning, Kim Mojram from the Express. Am I being heard?
Yes, morning, Kim. Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, morning, ministers, doctors. Okay, just quickly, Minister Dayal saying, I know the Minister of National Security is not here, but would you be able to tell us at all what kind of volume of people are applying to leave Trinidad, actually? Applying for exemptions to leave. A lot of dual citizens seem to be wanting to go abroad to conduct their business relevant to their dual citizenship, medication, that sort of thing. And could you give us any idea to all of the volumes or the types of charter flights operating in and out of Trinidad that people are utilizing for that purpose, for the purpose of leaving? Also, you spoke earlier, I won't go back there, we've seen another imported case and another imported case. Are there ongoing discussions, which I imagine there are, about repatriation and the possibility of expanding it. It may happen very suddenly depending on what happens around the world, because obviously government would want to bring back as many of its nationals as quickly as possible. But could you tell us how these discussions are impacted every time, for instance, we get an imported case? Is it that something may be on the table, look, we can increase our quarantine facilities by 2 or 3 places in the coming 3 weeks, let's say, and then suddenly we get this imported case, or we see what's happening elsewhere in the Caribbean, and those discussions are shelved? Can we just have an idea of how that process goes?
Okay, so you were quite right in the preamble to your question. Those questions on flights and those leaving are for the Minister of National Security. I would suggest you pose that to him. I would not even attempt to answer that because I simply don't have the information, and persons leaving Trinidad is a matter for the Ministry of National Security. To answer the second part of your question about quarantine places, and it's worth repeating again, it's not that you have 10, let's just use a rough figure, 10,000 persons wanting to come back, and you create 10,000 quarantine spaces. It doesn't work like that, because we have to assume, one, that a certain percentage of that 10,000 will in fact turn positive. And I'll give you some examples, because as Professor Carrington said, we simply don't know certain things. On the Costa Favolosa, 71% of those persons turn positive. If you bring back 10,000 persons and 71% turn positive, that's 7,000 positive cases. What are we going to do with them? The entire healthcare system has 3,000 to 3,000 beds. It means you'll have to empty out your hospitals, send everybody home, crash your public health system, crash the parallel system. So it's not as easy to say there are X number of people outside there and create X number of quarantine beds. Also, you have to consider your HR. Do we have the HR to accommodate 10,000 persons? The answer is no. Consumables, do we have it at any one point in time? PPE, all those things are what we have to consider at the Ministry of Health. So if we use the example of Costa Favolosa, which is always in the back of my mind especially, where 71% turn positive, the answer to your question is we have to continue to be prudent, and every single day, Dr. Mariam Richards, who manages the parallel healthcare system, meets with the Ministry of National Security to update them on what is the timetable for spaces that are available, spaces that are potentially available, because whenever we get a positive test, that throws off your projections. So it's a very, as I said, this thing is not playing drafts. This thing is playing three-dimensional chess. There are so many variables that we have to continue bringing in people in the manner that we have been doing it, strategically, in numbers that we could accommodate, assuming that a certain percentage of them are going to turn positive. So, Kim, I really hope that answers the second part of your question. Thank you very much for raising it.
Thank you. AZP News?
Hi, good morning. Priya Bihari, AZPnews.com.
Good morning, Priya.
There was a report that the Oxford vaccine showing some triggered an immunity response to the COVID-19, and the UK government has ordered, I think, about 90 million of it. My question is, therefore, at what point in time would we think about buying some vaccines, and then how would we distribute it in terms of who will go first, if we get priority, maybe the health workers, etc. How would that begin?
Okay, thank you for the question, Priya. I would have indicated, and I read out 2 pieces of correspondence on last week, Wednesday's press conference or Saturday's. The first piece of correspondence I read out to the public was a letter from Dr. Carissa Etienne from PAHO to the Honorable Prime Minister, asking him, and I could probably read it out again because I think it's worth repeating, about whether Trinidad and Tobago would like to be considered in a vaccine distribution process. I read out the letter, and then I also read out the response from the Honorable Prime Minister indicating that Trinidad and Tobago has actually signed off to that vaccine acquisition process and vaccine distribution process. So I am going to give you again, because I think it's worth repeating. I have the letters here. Letter dated 2nd July 2020, subject: access and affordability of potential COVID-19 vaccines and updates on PAHO's collaboration with Gavi Alliance on the global COVAX facility. This is basically a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister asking the Prime Minister whether we are willing to participate in this. The Prime Minister, so I'm not going to go through the entire thing again. The Prime Minister did respond on the 13th of July 2020, a letter to Carissa Etienne, in which he said, we are also happy to learn about PAHO's close involvement with the COVID-19 vaccines, global access facilities, and basically he has indicated that we are ready, willing and able to have Trinidad and Tobago access vaccines in what is called an equitable fashion. That is, the vaccine should not only be available to wealthy countries, but across the board to poor countries, middle-income countries, and so on. The last paragraph of Dr. Rowley's response goes like this. We expect PAHO to identify the optimal, equitable, and that's the key word, and affordable access strategies for the participating member states. And in that regard, we submit this expression of interest to confirm solidarity of the PAHO member states as a regional bloc in future engagement of PAHO with the COVAX facility. In other words, Trinidad and Tobago being a member of PAHO, PAHO will be negotiating as a bloc, because the worst thing you want is for individual states to be negotiating on their own. When you pool your negotiating power, you get better deals. So Trinidad and Tobago is firmly in step with PAHO and wants vaccines that are safe, reliable, and affordable are available regardless of their source, whether it's Oxford, Moderna, wherever, we will have access to it. So thank you for raising that issue prior.
Minister, I think you also asked about priority in the distribution of the vaccine.
So the priority in distribution, depending on the volumes we get, will be determined by the Chief Medical Officer. As we currently do with flu vaccines, I will just tell you what the protocol is for flu vaccines. We prioritize 5 or 6 classes of persons. They are the elderly, those with pre-existing conditions, healthcare workers. We prioritize children between 2 and 5, and those who are immunocompromised. That's what we do with flu vaccines. The protocols for distributing COVID vaccines are not yet cast in stone, but that is how we treat with these matters. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going back to TV6. TV6?
Hello? Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning again.
Morning.
Could we have an update on participation in the drug trial? And I also want to...
Well, you have one question, TV6.
So
you have one question.
Yeah,
what is your question, please?
Okay. I wanted to get an update on our participation in the drug trial.
Yeah. So the Ministry of Health Ethics Committee had 2 meetings with the University of the West Indies, that matter being discussed, because the University of the West Indies are the body for Trinidad that will be participating and the principal investigator for that particular study. So we have a meeting on Friday of the Ethics Committee to make a final decision with regards to the revised drugs. As you would have noted, there was a particular drug that was on the trial from WHO's end in the initial days and has been withdrawn because of basically lack of efficacy of that particular drug. So the trial has been reconstructed to some extent. So we are discussing that matter on Friday, and we'll discuss it with the University of the West Indies if need be. But our caseload since about 2 months ago has been extremely low, and there has not been an opportunity. Most of the cases have been asymptomatic, very well cases, so there has not been a case that we could have used those drugs had we approved it at this point.
Okay, I have a question from online, and it is to the CMO. Can you enlighten us on the use of shields as a protection for those who feel restrictive with masks?
Okay, so I think we discussed this a little bit before, so we're just saying to make sure it is recommended as an alternative for persons that cannot tolerate the mask for medical reasons and otherwise, as a suitable alternative for the general population, persons that are not unwell. But we still recommend that if you are ill, that the first choice should be your mask, and of course staying at home if you're ill, not going out into the general population. But it is a suitable alternative, making sure that again it goes below your level of your chin, so it covers your nose and mouth completely and goes beyond the level, beyond your eyes on the horizontal front.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of today's virtual media conference, and do remember that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Communications are your only credible sources of government information on COVID-19. As you know, there are now 5 COVID-19 positive patients at Cora Hospital. Opening hours for bars have been extended to 10 p.m. CSEC and CAPE examinations are taking place, and SEA students and their teachers returned to the classroom this morning. This means that more persons are now out in public spaces, even as we continue to live with the pandemic. Therefore, I am encouraging parents, teachers, principals, and students to adhere to COVID-19 guidelines for schools. Patrons and bar owners, please, we cannot return to the worrisome time when persons gathered in large numbers at your establishments, ignored physical distancing guidelines, and did not wear masks. The World Health Organization warned that flare-ups are to be expected as restrictions are lifted. It is therefore important that we do not become complacent. Let us continue to maintain physical distance, engage in regular hand hygiene, use cloth masks in public, ensure public spaces are sanitized, and stay home if you are sick. We must protect each other and our beautiful country. I am Donna Cox, Minister of Communications. Thank you for joining us today as the government continues its efforts to keep the curve flat and beat COVID-19. Stay safe